you have to get away from being the giver of information. That what we're used to, being the authority here, being the teaching and the information sort of giver. You have to listen to your students and take their individuality into account and incorporate their ideas and beliefs in the discussion. Don't engage in the pedagogy of answers.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week, on Speaking of Language,
Mariame Sy discusses the history of African language teaching in the United States and identifies opportunities for innovation in the language classroom.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. We are delighted to have Mariame Sy on our podcast today. Dr. Sy is a lecturer in African languages and the director of the African Language Program at Columbia University.
She gave a talk as part of our monthly LRC speaker series on critical thinking in world language teaching, which you can watch on our YouTube channel.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Mariame.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Angelica. Glad to be here.
Before we dive into all things critical thinking, can you please talk a little bit about your background and your path with languages?
Right, it's a very long one, my path with languages.
Give us the digest.
Let's just say that I actually grew up in completely multilingual environments. My parents speak several languages. They've lived in different countries. Down to my grandparents spoke several languages. So I grew up hearing different languages and being interested in language. And I remember that when I was about maybe 10 years, I was sort of semi-functional in Pular. And I went to my grandmother and said, I want to be more proficient in Pular. So from now on, you speak to me in Pular. Oh. And this is actually how I worked on being more proficient in Pular. A little bit later in my life, I also find myself being interested in literature. I was much of a reader, and then my undergraduate studies were actually in literature. But I was also doing a certificate in teaching English as a second language. So later on, I fell into linguistics. So my graduate studies were in linguistics. So when I was a graduate student at UCLA, this is how I sustained my graduate studies. I started teaching Wolof from my very first year. So this is how I came to teaching African languages.
In your talk, you traced the history of African language teaching in the United States and presented ideas for incorporating critical thinking at all levels of the language curriculum. What are some of the challenges of integrating critical thinking in language teaching practices, especially in less commonly taught languages, and how can educators overcome them?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenge, and someone I think did ask this question during the talk, is that you wonder how much you can do at the very elementary level, right? So that's a big challenge. And at the elementary level, what you want to focus on is really build background. You want to give them lots of cultural background, but you do this in L1. Now, constraining your tasks, making them think about the language, some maybe very small information regarding the meaning of terms and sort of what do they convey in the culture is pretty much what you can do. You can't make them have discussions at a high level, obviously. So you have to figure out how to work within the language that they have, how to work at level. So then language proficiency also has to come in, and this is at all levels. You cannot lose sight of your proficiency goals, and you have to incorporate that in your design, your task designs.
So, in your talk, you also differentiated 3 opportunities for creating innovative practices. And I think you just talked about some of them already. So, these 3 opportunities are educational outcomes, so what the learners can do, content, what should be taught or what is taught, and then manner, how the goals of language teaching are achieved. Can you please tell us a little bit more about what these opportunities look like at different proficiency levels? And maybe you can give more specific examples for, like, what would you do specifically to encourage students to engage in critical thinking at the beginning, at the intermediate, and at the advanced level?
Okay, so your can-dos, as I call them, will come from your performance targets. What do you want your student to be able to do at a certain level of language? So, for example, for elementary level, it's really you're looking for them to be able to make isolated sentences. Maybe at the level of elementary too, a little bit of connecting, but not too much. So what you do is design your task backwards from this target. So your content, what you're teaching, will constitute the basis of your tasks, right? So at the elementary level, then, what you're looking for is for the students to be able to make some type of statement. So, for example, I gave the family example during the talk. I'm going to go back to that. So we saw that in Wolof culture, there are certain relationships that are specifically stated, others not so much. So your uncle on your paternal side is your father. There's no differentiation. But your uncle on your maternal side has a specific term, and so does your aunt from your paternal side. So once you expose students to this, what you're then looking for them to stay to be able to recognize and say is that something like, for example, there is only one uncle in my culture, right? But in Senegalese culture, you have father, which is uncle, and you have nijay, which is also uncle. Just very simple things. Now, at the intermediate level now, you want them to go into this, to dig deeper into it. Why are there these different terms in the culture? What are the values associated with it? And why is that? At the advanced level, of course, you are able to do much more, and you want to set your performance target for students to be able to elaborate on the ideas and support opinions, because this is where you're going to start saying, what do you think about this? What did you get from this, right? So that is sort of what you do with the can-dos, right? So you have to set your essential sort of questions. What are the questions that students need answers for or need to answer, right? And your can-dos also, you have to set them. Students should be able to identify X, Y, and Z. Students should be able to differentiate X and Y.
Yeah.
Right. So that. Now with the next would be what should be taught, right? So what should be taught comes from the themes that you think are important in the culture. So you have to come up with basically a program, a set of themes that are important into the culture, the cultural perspectives and big ideas essential to understand the culture. So this is how you will get your materials, basically. You get authentic materials from which you can expose students to the essential sort of items that will make them understand the culture better. So you ask the essential questions from those authentic materials.
What are some best practices for designing materials that can facilitate the integration of critical thinking? Are there specific examples that reach beyond cultural aspects?
Well, I mean, we've been saying culture, but I mean, culture encompasses a lot of things. So
Yes.
this your themes can extend to whichever aspect of the life of the people who speak these languages. You have, I mean, politics, whatever you want, right? But I think that with all of that, whatever you are covering, some of the best practices that you must keep in mind is that you have to get away from being the giver of information or the that what we're used to being the authority here, being the teaching and the information sort of giver. So you have to listen to your students and take their individuality into account and incorporate their ideas and beliefs in the discussion. Right. Don't engage in the pedagogy of answers, basically, but rather lead the students to explore their ideas, rather challenge them and stimulate thought. So, well, you need to initiate and guide, of course, discussions, but essentially, you would have to encourage students to dig deep into also the cultural background that they have, the cultural knowledge that they have in about the people, and lead them to finding connections between concept, values, and ways of thinking.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting that, and I think an important reminder that we all need to reflect on. If we think back about the beginning level in particular, I'm wondering when you integrate critical thinking and encourage your students to reflect on language and culture learning, do you do some of that in English then? Because, I mean, as you mentioned, right, students can't really engage in critical thinking at the beginning level in the target language. So as you're introducing, family relationships, is that something that you then step back in your teaching and you discuss, the background of why this terminology might be different from what students may be used to from English or from the American context?
Yes, definitely. I tend to be extensive in my culture notes, so they have a lot there, and
Okay.
and of course they will come back with questions. This doesn't mean that I'm covering everything, but when they come back with questions, yes, then I go to L1. I'm going to explain certain things clearly in English at that level.
So these culture notes, is that something that students would read ahead of time before they come into the
They
classroom?
do.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That's great.
What advice would you give a colleague who wants to foster more critical thinking in their classroom? Where can they start?
Yes. So, well, I guess ideally you would want to have an articulated program. You would want to have thought about this, and as you can see, this is a progression. You must begin at the elementary level to supply enough information to be able to do this at higher levels. But even if you don't, you can begin by devising a systematic plan to incorporate critical thinking tasks. So I'm going to go back again to the questions I talked about before. You need to ask yourself, what are the enduring understandings that students should get from unit Y or Z,
No.
right? What are the critical questions to ask? So once you have isolated this, you can begin to build your material and tasks based on your list of understandings and questions. So if you have a textbook, you can follow the textbook, but these materials that you're incorporating would be supplementary ones. So you can follow your textbook with each unit, but determine what are the enduring understanding and the essential questions, and then incorporate them on, some supplementary tasks that you would have designed.
Do you have any published materials or materials that are available for any colleagues who are interested in getting started with the process of incorporating more critical thinking? Or do you have pointers of where people can go to learn more?
Not yet. I don't. I hope I will have that soon. And I think the publication that I pointed to during the talk, Jennifer Eddy's uncovering curriculum, was very useful to me, and then the fact that also we worked together on doing this curriculum design. This is, I think I mentioned in the talk that this is what gave me the idea of incorporating critical thinking. So that format is very useful. It does not necessarily give you what you need to incorporate critical thinking tasks, but that it is very conducive to it. So your essential questions can include critical questions.
Wonderful.
What other projects are you working on right now?
Again, well, it's good that I just talked about this. We continuing to work with Dr. Jennifer Eddy. This is the group that was at the Institute in 2013. And what we're doing now with these sort of material that we've produced is to use it and start doing a vertical articulation. So that means that we are going to intentionally coordinate instruction and assessment across levels. So we're going to design this curriculum going from elementary, intermediate to advanced. So that is what I'm working on now, and also working on integrating, critical thinking into my curriculum design. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, we look forward to seeing what comes out of all of this planning and seeing how that translates into the classroom.
Thank you.
Mariame, before we sign off, we'd like to ask you to share your favorite word in a language you speak, you love, you are learning, you may want to learn. Let's hear that favorite word of yours.
This is a trap. Anyway.
No, it's not.
Oh, God, I love so many words. But let's see, there's a word in Wolof that I really love. And I think that I feel that it's the way that it was formed. This is not because of even how it sounds, but it's just that how it was formed, these elements in the word so clearly explain what it is. But when you're trying to kind of translate it or give the meaning, for example, in English, you fall short. And this word is munyalante. So mun means to to have patience, endurance, to be empathetic, yeah. And then there's a suffix that's added to it, which is al, and this al suffix is a benefactive. And then there's another suffix added to it. This ante suffix is a reciprocal. So when you look at the meaning of the word is to be patient, to be empathetic with each other for the benefit of each other, right? So I just love that it carries so much in it.
That's wonderful. Can you repeat it for us one more time?
Muñalante.
Very cool.
Well, thank you so much for speaking of language with us, Mariame.
The pleasure was all mine. Good to see you too again.
Likewise. Next week, we have our annual Thanksgiving special in store for you.
Be sure to tune in and reflect on all the things to be grateful for.
Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
or follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.